if you're like most producers and you have no idea how music theory works, where to start, why it's good for you, this is the perfect video for you. The reason I'm making this video is because whenever I started, I remember like exactly music theory was my biggest pain point and something which I really, had a problem with studying, understanding, finding good resources to, just watch and read and, learn. I want to make this video for people who have no idea how to start and, just try and explain the most essential basic things in the easiest way possible. So yeah, this video is going to be broken down into different sections. So if you're a little bit more advanced, if you know some things and if you don't know other things, like feel free to skip around the whole video. I'm going to leave timestamps in the description so they should show up in the video. And yeah, let's start from the complete basics. Now in Western music, we use 12 notes. Pop, hip hop, R&B, all these genres, we use 12 notes. Now, there are some cases like Indian music, they have microtonal frequencies, they have maybe 50 notes, like it depends. But if you make beats, you use 12 notes. So here we have the 12 notes. Right, this is an octave. We have 12 notes here. Now when it comes to scales, major and minor scales, we use 7 notes out of these 12 notes. And to get a major or a minor chord, the scales are going to be different depending on the intervals which you choose to use. So in the case of C minor, we're going to be using C, which is the root note. We're going to be using D, D sharp, F, G, G sharp, A sharp, and back to C. So we have these 7 notes out of the 12. Now in the case of C major, we're going to be using C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. And when you bring back the minor scale, you're gonna notice something. We have 3 differences. And that's just these 3 notes which have been moved down a semitone. And the reason behind this is just the different intervals which are being used to build these scales. If we take these 3 notes and we pitch them up 1 semitone up, we're gonna get the major scale. And vice versa. If we take the major scale and we pitch down these 3 notes, we're gonna get the minor scale. Now, as I said, this has to do with the way scales are built, the intervals between them, and I'm gonna build a scale from scratch. So let's start with the major scale. We start on the C, or this can be any other note, but basically the first note which you pick, this is gonna be the start of your scale. So there's something called whole steps and half steps. And the way the major scales are built, you basically start on the root note, then you have a whole step, which means you're gonna skip 1 note. So this is gonna be our half step, and this is gonna be our whole step. So from C all the way up to D, skipping 1 note, this is a whole step. The second interval in major scales is also gonna be a whole step. So from D, we're gonna go to D sharp, which is 1 note, and then to E, which is 2 notes. Again, a whole step. Now the third interval in major scales is gonna be a half step. So from E, we're gonna go to F. Just 1 note, a half step. And as you may have guessed, if you're looking at the gray notes here, the next 3 steps are just gonna be whole steps. So ho, ho, ho. Our last step is gonna be a half step once again, which is gonna be from B up to C, which is the root note. Once again, just to conclude this, the way major scales are built, we have a whole step, then we have a whole step, then we have a half step, then we have a whole step, a whole step, a whole step, and finally a half step. And I want to point this out. Intervals are going to be extremely important later on, and basically intervals is what the entirety of music is built on. So scales, chords, inversions, chord progressions, everything is built on intervals. Okay, so now back to the minor scale. Now, the minor scale is, as we said, built in a different way than the major scale. Here's a little interesting thing. So basically, if you take the major scale and you move it 3 semitones, you're actually gonna get the relative minor scale. So if you take any minor key, for example, it says that the sample is in C major. Well, actually this means that the sample is in A minor, because the relative minor key of C major is basically C pitched down 3 semitones. So here we have the C major scale notes, and here we have the A minor scale notes. Now I want you to see what happens whenever I just come here, I take the first 2 notes of the A minor scale and I pitch them up an octave. As you can see, we have the C major scale. And also this works the other way around. So here we have the C major scale, and if I were to take the top two notes, the last two notes out of the scale, and if I were to pitch them down an octave, and if I take the root note as A, then we have the A minor scale. And this works with every single key, every single scale. So if you have a major key and you want to find the relative minor key, all you gotta do is take the major key and pitch it down 3. And if you have a minor key and you want to find the relative major key, all you gotta do is take the minor scale and you pitch it up 3 semitones. Okay, so now we know how scale degrees are built, now we know what intervals are. Let's move ahead, and I'm gonna explain to you what scale degrees are. Oftentimes, if you watch my videos, if you watch other people's videos, you're gonna hear things like, I took the 3rd, I added the 7th, I added the 9th, you know, all these things. Now, those are called scale degrees. And what this means is, basically, it's just an easy number system to define every single note from the scale. So starting off, we have the root note, which is gonna be the 1 in every single scale. Now this has nothing to do with the type of notes you're gonna be using, the type of scale you're gonna be using. In every single scale, minor, major, the first note used in that scale is gonna be called the root note or the 1. The second note out of the scale is gonna be the 2nd, is gonna be the 2. The 3rd note, of course, you might have guessed it, is gonna be called the 3rd. And this is called a 3rd interval. Now moving on to the 4th. After that, we're gonna have the 5th, we're gonna have the 6th, and the 7th, and back to a whole octave. And this moves me to the next point. So, chords. How are chords built? Now, regardless of the scale that we're in, if we say that we want to make a triad chord, this means a chord which consists of the root note, the 3rd, and a 5th. Triad, 3 notes. We're gonna have the root note, the 1. In this case, we're in the scale of C minor, so we're gonna have C. Then we're gonna move to the 3rd, which is D sharp, and then we're gonna add a 5th. And since we're in the minor scale, if we start building a chord on the root note and a minor scale, the first chord is always gonna be a minor chord. If we move to a major scale, the first chord built on top of a root note is always gonna be a major chord. And this is where the other part of scale degree comes into play. Now I've showed this image in a lot of my other videos, but here I'm gonna break it down for you and I'm gonna explain how chord progressions are built. So we're in the scale of C minor, right? We have our root note. If we build a triad chord, as I said, this is gonna be a minor chord, just because the way intervals are built. So the first chord is gonna be minor. Now if we move to the 2nd degree, or we start building a chord from the 2nd note up. So this is the 2nd note of the C minor scale. We're gonna skip a note, and then we're gonna skip a note again, and we're gonna get a diminished chord. And as the picture says, in every single scale, the 2nd chord will always be a diminished chord. Now moving on to the 3rd chord, the 3rd scale degree, the 3 chord. If we start building a chord from the 3rd note up, following the intervals, that's gonna result in a major chord. Moving on to the 4th degree, or the 4th note out of the scale, the 4 chord. If we start building on top of that, we're gonna get a minor chord. The 1st, the 4th, and the 5th in any minor key are always minor chords. The 2nd is always gonna be diminished, and the 3, 6, and 7 is always gonna be major chords. So we have the 5th here. Then we have another major chord, which is gonna be the 6th degree, or the 6th chord. And finally, we have the 7th chord, which is, once again, as I said, it's gonna be a major chord. And as I said, like, this exact thing applies to major scales as well. So we have the root note, we have the 3rd, we have the 5th, and then we have a basic major chord. The 2nd degree in the major scale is gonna be D. So if we build on top of this, following the intervals of the major scale, we're gonna get a minor chord. So in major scales, the first chord is gonna be major, the second one is gonna be minor, instead of a diminished chord. third degree in major scales is gonna be also a minor chord. Now the fourth and the fifth degree are gonna be major and major scales. So we're gonna have this and we're gonna have this. And as you might have guessed, the sixth degree in major scales is always gonna be a minor chord. And now you might be wondering, okay, but where does the diminished chord go? Because remember, in the minor scales we had the second one being a diminished chord and it was built on top of a B. So if we go here to the 7th degree in major scales and using the intervals of placing a note, skipping a note, placing a note, skipping a note, we're gonna get a diminished chord. You might ask, okay, but what can I do with this information? And this is probably the most important part, like knowing scale degrees. You can make countless chord progressions, like you can do anything. For example, let's say I want to do a 1-7-6 chord progression. You already know, like you can pick any key and you're gonna start on the 1, which is the root note, and you're gonna go to the 7, which is here, and then to the 6th. So the root notes are gonna sound like this. After that, you know that you can use these chords, you can build on top of these chords using intervals, and you can have full chords. Now you might want to use some inversions. So for example, you're gonna take the thirds of each chord and then you're gonna pitch them up. And as you can see, like you already have an easy chord progression which has like a good sound, like it's emotional, like you can take it to the next level, like you can start adding top line notes and you know you can have a full sample. Maybe you want to switch it up a little bit, so you can do a 1, 6, 7, and let's say a 5. So yeah, this might sound good. We already have some knowledge, like we can make chord progressions, we know how to build scales, we know how to build chords, but let me take it a step further. So the next thing I'm gonna show you is more advanced chords and how you can actually build 7 chords, 11 chords, 9 chords, 13 chords, add 9, add 11, like all these type of chords. Starting off with the 7 chord, which is very frequently used in R&B and you know just pop music. You know, it has a little bit more flavor. So all you gotta do, if you have a basic triad chord, you're gonna skip a note and you're gonna add a note here. So this is gonna be your 7th degree. So basic triad chord, 7th chord. After that, if you wanna add a 9th chord, again, you're gonna skip this and you're gonna go to the 9th degree. And with the 7 and 9 added, you have a minor 9th chord. Now you can keep building on top of this, like you can add an 11th, you can add a 13th, so minor 11 chord, minor 13 chord. But usually these type of chords you would, you know, play a lot with the inversions, might pitch them up like over the course of multiple octaves. But yeah, those are pretty much the basics. Now what about add chords? So basically an add chord, for example, add 9, add 13, add 11, like so and so. This basically means a normal triad chord with an added something. So basically a minor add 9 chord is gonna be a 9th chord, but without the 7th degree. So now we know how the different type of chords are built in major scales and in minor scales. Let's take a look at the more specific chords, which are, you know, not as frequently used, but it's still important to know. So oftentimes, if you want to make dark melodies, if you watch different tutorials, you've come across the suspended chords. Now, what is a suspended chord? What a suspended chord is basically if you take any minor triad chord and you take the third or, you know, the middle note of the chord and you pitch it down 1 semitone, this is gonna be a suspended 2 chord. And if you take the middle note and you pitch it up 2, this is gonna be a suspended 4 chord. And if you want to make the typical dark melody chord progression, you're typically gonna find these suspended chords and dark chord progressions and basically something which sounds like this. Now for the next type of chord, which I want to talk about more in depth, is going to be the augmented chord. What this chord is, basically, if you take a major chord and you know you just build it here If you take the fifth, or out of the triad, the top note, and you sharpen it, which basically means pitching it up one semitone, you're gonna get an augmented chord. Now this chord is very tense, and usually you would not use it in trap beats or rap beats, but it's very frequently used in neo soul because it creates a lot of tension, and then it's really helpful to make something which is going to resolve it later on. But even if you never use it, it's very useful to know like the different type of chords. We already talked about this one, but the next type of chord which I want to talk about a little bit more is going to be the diminished chord. And basically what the diminished chord is, you can think of it as like the augmented chord but for minor chords. So in the case of major chords, if we took the fifth note and we pitched it up one semitone up, we got the augmented chord, right? But if we build a minor chord, and instead of taking the fifth and pitching it up one semitone up, we're gonna be pitching it down one semitone down. And this is how you get the diminished chord. So basically, major chords, the fifth pitched one octave up is gonna be augmented, and a minor chord with the fifth pitched down a semitone down, you get a diminished chord. And finally, let's talk about the dominant chord. Now, the dominant chord is basically a chord which creates this sense of, almost resolving. The reason why it's called dominant is because it has a very strong pull, which, just pulls you back and wants you to resolve back to the one chord. Now, in minor scales, the dominant chord is usually the 5th degree. So this would be G minor, but the dominant chord is a major chord. So this means that we're gonna take the middle note here and turn the G from a minor to a major chord. And then we want to turn it into a dominant 7 chord, which is basically just adding the 7th note. And as you can hear, like it has this very tense sound, which if you play it on its own, like it doesn't sound nice, but it makes you go back to the one chord. And I found that the dominant 7 chord usually works very well with the 5th degree, with the 4th degree, and with the 6th degree. So in this example, I have a 1 chord, dominant 7th, 4th chord, and then a 7th chord. And like in this case, you can use it to create a lot of tension and then release. So yeah, I hope you found this video helpful. If you take the time, learn all of this, you're gonna be able to make chord progressions without even thinking. You're gonna be able to recognize the different types of chords, how to build scales, how to build chords, how to build melodies, and all that stuff. So yeah, catch you in the next video.